want to at this one interview, I kind of wanted to compare notes with the Whitmer case and J6 because I think there's so many overlaps, there's so many similarities, and I really wanted to highlight that. I think you're probably the best person to do that because of the stuff that you put out on Twitter. I always see you talking about what the feds were doing in there, and I'm like, yeah, he knows what's up. So I
One
think that
rat, two rat,
hopefully,
red rat, blue rat. Yeah, plenty of rats.
yeah, hopefully this is a good overview for people who maybe weren't familiar with Tim's case, or maybe you're more familiar with the Whitmer case, you don't know much about J6. Hopefully this was a good overview for people on both of the cases and the similarities between the two, the connections, of course, between the Whitmer case and who at the FBI was overseeing January 6th as well.
But usually in the J6 statements of facts, you have FBI agents or investigating officers, and they'll say something like, "Hi, I'm Officer such and such. I've been empowered to investigate crime at the Capitol." Blah blah blah. In my case, the NCIS agent who investigated me, he said, "I am Lieutenant Colonel such and such, and I was on duty on January 6th. I'm investigating Timothy Hale." And then you have this with several FBI and I guess JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force guys. There's like a handful of J6 defendants where the officers investigating their case write in the statement of facts that they were specifically on duty on January 6th. So there's this open question of, were these feds following us? Were they actually there that day? What were they doing? And the government refuses to answer what they were actually doing.
Joined today by Tim Hale, who is somebody I've wanted to interview for a while now. I've been wanting to compare notes with you with the Whitmer case in January 6th. So I'm really happy to have you on here. I know you have served for 10 years. You were in the military, you were a Navy contractor, and then spent 3 years in prison due to January 6th. Is that correct?
That would be correct. It's so correct, I can't stand it. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I've been meaning to do this for the longest time. I kind of want to get your story. So why don't we just start there? Give people, for people who don't know anything about you, don't know who you are, give yourself a little introduction.
Well, sure. My name is Timothy Hale. As you alluded to, pretty much spent my entire adult life in public service. Was in the U.S. Army as an administrator. I worked for the Navy as a weapons contractor. Independent, but Trump supporter. And yeah, January 6th. So that happens. Let's get into that. I didn't. I just went there for a speech. So for a lot of us, I think just went there to see President Trump speak. Didn't know there was going to be a protest at the Capitol in the first place. Went there. Didn't know there was going to be a riot. Went there,
Right.
and then spent 3 years behind bars. It's a very convoluted story, probably me more so than most defendants. You know, I'm sure if you've followed me in particular, I'm a smartass. So,
Yes. I
there,
remember when you first got arrested and the headlines that went out, and they were using pictures of you from one of your skit videos that
yeah,
was,
yeah,
one of
yeah.
your impression videos that they chose to take out of context to portray you as like, this crazy
Neo,
dissident that you clearly weren't.
far right extremist. I did not see that coming, and frankly, I find it offensive. So, yeah, basically, I was a satirist on the side, and they took years old satire. Like this wasn't even from J6. In particular, the angry mustache man picture was from a year before J6. And so basically, they tried to portray me as a far right extremist, and it had nothing to do with what I actually did at the Capitol. Like that's like a lot of people
Right.
who I was incarcerated with, a lot of people who got like really the worst treatment in the press. They were really smeared, but in my case, it had nothing to do with what I actually did because they just arrested me and they didn't even have anything on me. I got turned in by the management at my company because I was the union rep, and so they knew I had gone to
Wow.
J6, and we had a very bad relationship. I was actually working with my congressman Chris Smith to get my employer investigated for violating labor laws, and so they saw
Oh, wow.
I had years of stuff on them because they were there's this thing called USERA for veterans. Like if you're in the army, if you're in the reserves, or if you're in the National Guard, you have this law called USERA, and it protects you so that you can go on duty on the weekends without getting punished by your employers. You can't face retaliation. That was a big deal at the contracting company I was at. There's a long story, but it's kind of important detail because the management saw J6 as an opportunity to get rid of me. So they turned me into
Right.
NCIS. NCIS and the FBI, like they came to my house looking for me. They actually found my roommate. They scared him into wearing a wire, and they basically strapped him
Wow.
up so they could record me incriminating myself and saying incendiary nonsense while I was drinking. So
Oh my God.
didn't do me
That's
any
what they like
favors.
to do.
Yeah, yeah. It seems to be a
So
pattern.
that is a really important aspect to all of this. I think for people to understand that that's somebody that you never would expect that you need to like be cautious around, like a roommate, a friend, and here we are. We are now in like the Stasi era, I guess, of the
Right.
United States.
Well,
you know,
that's that's it too. And like I've had a lot of time to read while I was incarcerated, and I was a history major, so like I'm just genuinely like self-aware of like the end stage of of empires is typically when they're not even afraid of foreign governments anymore. Now they're at the end they start fearing their own citizens, and they start entrapping them and arresting them, and and so like you look at Tsarist Russia, or you look at I mean at the worst points anyway. You look at the Roman Empire when it became the most decadent, and like it's just interesting. Like you see the fall of these empires when they start basically informing on their own citizens. It's what I mean. Montesquieu talks about this. It's one of the most like despicable things. It's like nothing makes people resent their own government more than knowing that they're being spied on. Like but I
right.
digress. So yeah, after January 6th, I had been denied bail, and there's so many different directions to go on. I mean, we could go into what actually happened that day. We could go into what it was like living with a bunch of spies. We could go in different directions, but I'll leave that up to you.
Yes, I definitely want to do that. I do want to say that obviously, I think a big part of the January 6th story is the Whitmer case. I think that, Whitmer was sort of the dry run for January 6th. For people who don't know, during COVID and the Summer of Love in Michigan, there were several protests that were kind of, early on. So you had like April 2020, there was April 15, April 30th. There's these protests that are anti-lockdown protests, pro 2A protests, but like lots of people are showing up to this because they had locked down that entire state. Like you couldn't buy seeds, but they had like marijuana places open, or you could go buy alcohol, but you couldn't you couldn't cut somebody's hair, so you couldn't make a living. These people
Yeah,
couldn't work. They had nothing to do all day, and the FBI sort of set up, you know, a theatrical production, if you will. So they had already infiltrated and taken over the Wolverine Watchmen, which was a prepper group, and then it becomes a militia with their informant Dan Chappell as the executive officer who is conducting the training. He's, the FBI tells him you can train him anything that you see on YouTube, and he's kind of teaching them to be more like tactical and lethal. But in any case, I digress. He's in like basically the leader of the group. Joe Morrison is the founder of the Wolverine Watchmen, but by no sense is he the actual leader. Everybody looks to Dan, who presents himself as like a war hero. So they show up to this protest April 30th, 2020, and this is at the Lansing Capitol. Tons of people are there. There's a lot of guys there that are carrying their firearms. They're like in a full kits and whatnot. And the FBI has a mobile command unit. Their informant is wearing a live wire and a secondary recording device. So, like, they're listening in real time. You've got Agent Chambers, Heinrich Impala at the FBI, and they call the Lansing Capitol Police and tell them, quote unquote, stand down, open the doors, and let everybody in. So let these armed people who are outside angry and shouting, let them into the Capitol so that the FBI can get like their photo op, right? And so, the guys stand in line and they go through COVID screening. They like get their temperatures checked, and, they kind of occupy the building for several hours. There's photos of them from inside. Like, there's Adam Fox is like yelling at the one of the Lansing Capitol Police, like in their face. Pete Music goes down there, he's shouting, but they're not doing anything, right? Like they're just there protesting. And so it's so funny to me that in the media, it is portrayed like the next day in these headlines of, right wing militia groups storming capitals. And so the FBI was actually using that to recruit more people into the Wolverine Watchmen. They're like, oh my gosh, we're getting, national news. It was international. They were getting like headlines from other countries. So some of the guys thought that was cool, but the FBI had actually created, these like encrypted chat apps that they were getting these guys into so that they would talk about stuff like this. And they were just trying to funnel as many people as possible into these groups. So one thing they did was like the FBI actually created a national militia group called the United States Patriot 3%ers. That was led by Steve Robeson, an informant they were using who is a child sex offender and career criminal, who's been in biker gangs and things like that. And he is like, he inducts Adam Fox into the Michigan chapter of this fake group. And he, writes like the FBI creates and administers the Facebook page for the group. But then they'll say Adam was the ringleader. Adam consolidated control of the Wolverine Watchmen. He was never a Wolverine Watchman. So, this story is very convoluted and crazy, but I think that that kind of is important to show what the FBI was doing in 2020 in the lead up to the presidential election. They were very clearly trying to foment political violence, and not just on like this side of the militia groups, right? But also one of the undercover agents in the Whitmer case, he was at the same time had infiltrated the Denver Black Lives Matter movement, and they were trying to get somebody to do a plot to assassinate the Attorney General of Colorado. And this was all in the lead up to 2020. The guys in Michigan were arrested in October of 2020, 1 month before the election. That was used to kind of smear Trump, and they presented those guys as like Trump supporters. They were not. They were mostly libertarian. Some of them didn't like Trump. Some did, but they certainly were not as they were presented. And I think that there's a lot of similarities between the January 6th cases and the Michigan cases as far as like manipulation of evidence, planting things on people so that you can seize it later when you arrest them. The use of so many informants and undercovers, I think it's ludicrous to suggest that there were no undercovers present on January 6th, as the IG report has recently said. Oh, there were only 26 CHSs. Yeah, I don't think so. That's what they're willing to admit to. And so we can guess that the real figure is probably 3 times that many if they needed 12 informants and 3 undercovers to arrest and frame 14 men in Michigan. And, some of these guys were not even from Michigan. Then there you go. And they were in the lead up to this creating militia groups. Like, why is the FBI creating a national militia group? Their informants are administering the Facebook pages, and then they have other informants posing as heads of state chapters. So Jenny Plunk was the head of the Tennessee chapter of this FBI fabricated group. Steve was the national commander, but he was also pretending to be the head of Wisconsin. They told Adam he was the head of Michigan. And then they were trying to get a disabled Vietnam veteran named Frank Butler from Virginia to recruit an army in Virginia of 20 to 25 men to create a quick reaction force. And they were trying to convince him to kidnap and kill Ralph Northam. One of the informants proposed the use of an explosives-laden drone to be flown into Ralph Northam's North Carolina vacation cottage. So this is like what they're doing leading up to January 6th. And I really think that people need to understand that.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it continued long after J6 based on my experience in the jail.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about a lot of the things you said, especially, and I lived through that too. In New Jersey, of course, we had those COVID lockdowns. Phil Murphy, he was arresting. They were charging people for having outdoor parties. Meanwhile, you could always go. Like you couldn't go to church, but you could go to the liquor store.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. All the like everything you said about the different ways in which they created these militia groups and the way they tried to set people up. It's very familiar to me.
Either
And
created them or took them over like very quickly and become the leaders of these groups.
right, well, that's my experience. Well, first off, that they did the same thing with the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. Even before J6, we know like the number two within the Oath Keepers was an FBI informant. Um,
Yes.
we know
Who had a
that's
heart attack right before Stuart Rhodes' trial, in which he was
right.
set to testify. Greg
And then,
McWhorter.
and then there was and then of course in filings, the Proud Boys had what, dozens of informants inside there.
Yep.
I'm sure you know the story of Christopher Cuny. They were literally was an FBI informant following him around through the Capitol. He was involved in multiple breach sites, so their informant was actually breaking open parts of the building and entrapping people.
Of
But there,
course.
but there were no informants. Yeah.
Right. And
Um,
of course, not none of that information was provided to any January 6th defendants discovery, right? Every single
yeah, no.
person who was charged in connection with January 6th should have been given information about that.
Right. Well, I mean, you follow Will Pope and you've seen in his filings how like it's like pulling teeth. They'll never admit to anything. Then when they get caught in a lie, they'll be like, okay, yeah, maybe. And it's just like, well, can you give me a little more than that? Well, no. And then it's just like on and on. Like the guy gets pushed
Yes.
in to the building by someone who has, been identified as being more than likely a military contractor. They found the base he's working at, this, that, the other thing. They've admitted, well, whether he's a Fed or not, it's not material, So I mean, but that was just J6, and I know from my experience inside the jail, I lived through a lot of this stuff, and so whether it was people trying to get me to plot another Oklahoma City bombing, or talk about assassinating politicians, or joining a militia inside the jail, or signing documents advocating the overthrow of the government, this, that, the other. I mean, this is a real thing, and it sounds so unbelievably, insanely stupid that a regular person wouldn't believe it unless they were familiar with the MO of the feds in the first place. I went in there. I went into the DC jail expecting, okay, maybe there. I'll keep my eye out. There's probably going to be like one or two snitches. My mind was blown by the time I left that place. I was so grateful to go to prison, because I was just so tired of all the rats. Lose that. I mean, talk about the numbers. I would say like at the worst point, a third of the inmates were either Antifa provocateurs or federal informants. Um,
Wow.
yeah, there was a guy named Tom Civic. He when he wasn't busy showing people his butthole, he was trying to get me to talk about Timothy McVeigh. They used
Wow.
they, they used I obviously they used the satire at the end of the day to try to frame me. But before that, the guy I was in the Navy, well, the guy that I worked with who was in the Navy, he gave me a book. It was like it was sociological babble, but I like the social sciences. Yeah, you know. Sorry, but like I do like the social sciences, including sociology and all that. And so I like primary sources, so I collect primary sources, and one of them was this book, and it was written about a civil war in America. It was a fiction novel, very poorly written, by the way. And they tried to use this. There was the Turner Diaries. I'm not an advocate for what's in the Turner Diaries. I just got to put the disclaimer out there.
Mhm.
But I had this book because it was a primary source. I wasn't a fan of it. It was just in my book. I had thousands of books in my library. The feds knew this, and they took one or two books out there to try to frame me as extreme. Keep in mind, I have the Communist Manifesto. I have Das Kapital. I have the Quran. I'm not an Islamist. I'm not a communist,
Right.
but they take a few books to try to portray me as a whatever. And so what's interesting is that book, the Turner Diaries, was supposedly influenced McVeigh. Well, that's interesting. So the guy who is constantly asking me about my case, his father's trying to look up my case on the outside. His father was actually a this guy Tom Civic, his father was actually an officer in the Navy.
Oh,
He's
wow.
he's feeding information to his son, and his son's trying to get me to talk about Timothy McVeigh and trying to get me to believe that we should plot another Oklahoma City bombing. He's like,
Holy cow.
he's like Timothy McVeigh. He was a real patriot. He was a real American. He didn't just talk. He acted. I'm like, I disavow this. He's like, no, you do not. No, you do not. I had to get up. I'm like, you glow in the
Oh
dark,
my
and I had to walk away.
god.
And it was like that all the time in there.
That's crazy.
I don't know if you saw the post I made recently about the guy Troy Smocks. He was at the Capitol on a bullhorn. He denied he was ever there. He was never charged for being at the Capitol, though. He was charged with interstate threats because after J6,
Wow.
he started saying we should kill politicians and executives and stuff like that. Well, he winds up in the jail, and he's telling all of us he's an Army colonel. This dude was never a colonel in the Army, but
Oh
he's
my
a pat.
god.
And we're all like, "Oh, Colonel, okay." But then like we realized this dude doesn't know anything about the military, and he was in there to inform on the Oath Keepers. He was informing on me, Guy Reffitt. He was bragging to people, and he actually would walk around with a little piece of paper that he would keep in his pocket, and he would write down anything that someone said.
Oh my
And
god.
this is real stuff, and it's crazy because like he would like I would be it was like it was very rare we would get any news, but when we would get out of our cells eventually, like we were finally able to get like a newspaper here or there. And so me and another guy would be like sitting at a table reading a newspaper, and he would come up and he would just start saying, yeah, we need to assassinate politicians, we need to kill all these people. And me and these other guy look at each other like, what? It's just like, but this is really what life was like inside the gulag. And I always make this point: no gulag, no internment camp, no system of oppression like that works where it's just them at the top and us at the bottom. There's always intermediaries. So if you think that there aren't informants that are working for the people in power to set you up when you're being set up, it's just like you're out of your mind. Especially the real the concerning thing is like all of us were turned in by friends, family, roommates, coworkers, neighbors, all that. And it's just like it doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. Of course, about gas mask Batman by Jake Lang and his militia. He was trying to set up the Oath Keepers. He was trying to get them, like I said, to sign documents declaring themselves to be proud seditionists. Well, they were
Oh
being
my
charged.
god.
They're being charged with seditious conspiracy. He's like, yeah, sign a
Like,
document saying.
hello. Oh my gosh.
It's
To
like,
just admit to it on paper and sign
yeah,
your name
sure,
to
why
it.
not? You can trust me. I'm cool, bro. It's just like, dude, he would try to incite, especially
Insane.
like me and the Oath Keepers. He had a hard on for us because we didn't have violent charges, and so he would be like, real patriots have assault charges, and he would do it over and over, and he would basically try to incite people to beat him up, and it didn't work. But it was just
Wow.
like he tried to get me, Jeff McKellop, all the veterans. He tried to get us to join a fake militia inside the jail. Now, keep in mind,
Napalm.
Nate,
Is it
no,
called napalm or something?
not yet. That's that. Hold on. Shh. No. Here's so after J6, he's in his own documents. The government alleges that he's trying to overthrow the government with a violent militia or whatever. It's like, okay, well, recently, I think last year, or earlier this year, it was a guy named Christopher Finney. Never met the guy. I'm not saying he's good, bad, whatever, but in his statement of facts, they were able to identify him because he was in Lang's phone, because he was involved in a chat group for a militia started right after J6. So
Unbelievable.
I think we're all, those of us in the jail who refused to join the stupid honeypot, I think we're all grateful that we didn't, because that would have happened to us. And now, yes, even though he's within a federal prison somehow, or I guess maybe he's back in the DC jail. He's been bounced over like 20 different jails or prison. CHS,
Right.
yeah, he starts Napalm USA. It's just like all this does is serve to create bad headlines. All it does is serve to hurt President Trump and entrap people. And they're doing the same thing again. If you go to the website, I hope you use a VPN if you do. If you go to the Napalm website, there's different chapters for each state. And when you click on these chapters, they take you to Telegram chat groups. You're being
Oh my
watched.
god. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes. And do they have you sign your name on a sign-in sheet and like give them, your personal information and
hello, fellow terrorists, give me your, like, come on.
sign the sign-in sheet? I mean, it's so funny because the Whitmer guys, the government simultaneously is saying that they utilized and employed operational security, OPSEC, literally because they said the words OPSEC. So they go, oh, that means they must have been doing something, right? And it's patently absurd because on the one hand, they're saying that, oh, they took all these measures, they were in encrypted chats, but then at these meetings and at these FTXs, they're signing their name on a sign-in sheet. They're putting their phone numbers on it. So like, what are they actually employing, to throw off the feds if they're signing their names on a sign-in sheet that is literally given to them by an informant?
Yeah.
I digress, but that was the dichotomy of like the government saying one thing about these guys, like Barry Croft is a ringleader and dangerous domestic terrorist, but then privately they are saying amongst themselves, his handling agents Christopher Long and John Penrod are texting the informant Jenny Plunk, and they're calling him BH, which stood for bonehead. They're calling him a coward, and a pussy, and they're saying, oh, for somebody who talks a lot, he sure seems to be a coward. Like he talks big but does nothing, basically. They knew that. So they're saying that privately, but then publicly are telling everybody he was like a mastermind ringleader of a fake kidnapping plot. Well, it can't be both.
Right.
Yeah. It can't be both. You can't be utilizing OPSEC, but then signing a sign-in sheet, or referring to somebody as a terrorist and then privately laughing about the fact that they aren't going to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's all narrative control, and just looking at just the way you started this by going through the history of that militia thing. It's all it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so again, I look at what they kind of like what they did with me. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They claim I'm this thing, and then they do everything they can while I'm denied bail, while I'm in a controlled environment, to try to manufacture the evidence that is in fact the case. Like I'm sure you went over I'm sure you remember what I've told you about the NPR stuff, but like for those that don't know, I was denied bail. I was called an extremist, denied bail, and so I'm kept inside the DC jail pending trial, which is supposed to be according to the Speedy Trial Act, supposed to be 70 days. It ended up being 16 months, but by the time I'm finally sentenced and all that, it was almost 2 years before I finally got to prison. At my sentencing hearing, they were citing these NPR articles about me. It's like, well, that's weird. And then who's in the NPR articles giving them information about me? It's the informants who are in the jail with me. So,
wow.
So it's just like, wait. The jail didn't. Hold on. The government denies me bail, says I'm an extremist. They plant informants in the jail with me to try to incite me to violence, or get me to say something incriminating, or try to entrap me. I don't fall for their plans. So they go to NPR, National Public Radio, government-funded propaganda, and they plant hit pieces about me. They do this to prejudice juries against me, but also to corroborate any narratives about me at sentencing. Well, they mention it at my sentencing hearing. It's in my transcripts. And it's just like, well, gee, I wish I saw this coming 2 years ago, which I did. I knew this was like maybe not the NPR route, but I knew it was going to happen. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They create the evidence that they need. And so, yeah, I mean, nothing about what you said about these these stories has really surprised me. I always like to hear more about like the whole story, but I mean, people need to understand, like, it really is as bad as it sounds. It really is as bad as it sounds, and it doesn't get better. It doesn't get better. They never stop. Pat Con, the story of Pat Con, all these.
I was just gonna bring up Pat Con. I was just gonna say it's Pat Con 2.0, basically.
Yeah.
Of trying to, we're going to try to prevent the reemergence of the order by creating our own version of it. Like, sure thing.
Yeah.
We're gonna prevent terrorism by creating a national militia group and entrapping a bunch of people, by trying to orchestrate a multi-state domestic terror plot. That's the other thing about the Whitmer case. It wasn't just Michigan. Like, Barry Croft is from Delaware. he was framed as a ringleader. Why would he care about Whitmer's lockdown orders? He lived in Delaware. He is a trucker from Delaware, with 3 daughters. He's not a member of the Wolverine Watchmen. He wasn't part of the fake militia group.
Right.
So there's that, right? They had targets, like they had a target in Ohio they tried to set up, Jeremy Dieter. They had a Wisconsin target, Thomas Leaguer, that they wanted to set up. They had Frank Butler in Virginia, the disabled Vietnam veteran. They wanted to do an attack on Ralph Northam. They had Tim Sayer in Indiana, who they literally were trying to set people up. And, in my interviewing and, researching the Whitmer case, it appears that in as early as 2018, the FBI had made some kind of move to infiltrate the Midwest militia scene. There was an organization called the Midwest Coalition that, may have been created by the feds. And basically what I was told is that a bunch of these Midwest militia groups were approached by the feds. They were asked to give organizational membership lists. They wanted email addresses, phone numbers, names of everybody in the militia groups. And some of these people chose, rather than to turn that information over to the feds, to just step down from the militia groups. And we think it is at that point that the feds inserted their informants into leadership roles of these militia groups. So that's as far back as 2018. And that does seem to make a lot of sense, when you look at what's happened since then and what the FBI was doing as far as trying to create a multi-state plot to kidnap and kill governors all at the same time. That's their words, not mine. They said that the Whitmer case was the biggest domestic terror case in a generation. How embarrassing for them, right?
Yeah.
So they called and shared, this is the FBI, a nationwide meetup of militia groups. They called it a national attack planning meeting, literally called and shared by them via their pedophile informant. And about 14 people were invited to this. There were at least three informants that were there wearing, each had multiple recording devices. So they have a primary recording device and a secondary recording device. Some of these were disguised as a credit card or a key fob. So it's not like in the movies where you can pat somebody down and they're actually wearing a wire. No, it can be a credit card or a key fob. But anyways.
My roommate had an actual wire, by the way.
Oh, wow.
He had an actual wire.
He had an old school.
Yeah, and it's like the recording is longer than his talk with me, because there's at the start of the thing you can hear them putting it on him, and at the end.
Oh my god, that's so creepy.
And it's so it's kind of funny too. It's just you can't do you're the NCIS can't do better than an actual physical wire. Okay, dude. But
that is kind of funny. Yeah, so they calling and sharing a national meetup of militia groups, 3 informants, all, recording everything. And then everybody else that was there was a target. So that's how many people they were trying to target. And these are people they specifically brought together from different states to try to make it appear that these militia groups, they're organizing, they're getting together, and it's, between state lines, they're now planning something. They want to overthrow the government, kill governors and what have you. So it's so dumb and cheesy how this thing really happens. It's just a bunch of middle-aged guys who are upset about what's happening. The FBI offers to, in most cases, give them, drive them there and provide them food, pay for their hotel. So, the whole thing is comically stupid. And then they get them drunk and stoned. And then they try to rile them up, talking about hypotheticals, hypothetically speaking, would it be okay to do violence? Now, that night, this was June 6, 2020. It's at the Drury Inn in Columbus, Ohio. They called this the Dublin meeting. That night, there actually was a riot in Columbus, Ohio, and the informants were trying to get these people to go armed into this riot. So you can think what they were trying to do here. They're saying things to these guys they're in your backyard, give them no quarter. You can't just take brick and mortar. You've got to have a target to go with it. This is the informants saying these things. And then they're just recording what people say drunk and stoned in what they think is a private meeting amongst people who, were coming together to talk about what was happening in the country at the time, because there were things to be concerned about with the riots, with the lockdowns, with, governors overstepping. And so they had a reason to want to come together to talk, but the FBI wanted to use this to try to finagle a multi-state domestic terror plot and put it together, and then say that it was Barry and Adam's idea. Adam, of course, is the homeless man living in the basement of the Vac Shack in Grand Rapids. And so these people, they don't even come together. They don't meet each other, like, without the FBI introducing them. The FBI puts on these FTXs and hosts these meetings. And some of these meetings are 4 hours long, 5 hours long. And then at trial, they will play a 1 minute and 17-second clip. You don't hear what's said before or what is said after, to try to, just manufacture a false narrative. And then the exculpatory information was kept out of the whole thing. So at the federal trial, Judge Yonker did a hearsay ruling where he said that basically on a recording, on the same audio recording, if an informant said something that was incriminating for the feds, that's hearsay. But if there was audio that could be used against the men of them talking shit, oh, well, we can play that, but we can't play the other things on that recording. I don't think so. That's not a fair trial. It's not a real trial. These were show trials with the appearance of fairness, where the judge would maybe grant 1 or 2 defense motions, but everything else was denied. They weren't allowed to bring up the misconduct of the 3 lead handling agents in the case, because the judge said that wasn't germane to the case, even though one of those agents, Jason Chambers, he was, at the same time he was running this case, he had a private intelligence company called Exa Intel, where he was actually seeking contracts with the federal government and with state governments to protect them, do event monitoring, venue monitoring. How great for Exa Intel if you have people storming a Capitol, or, because then they can sell their proprietary venue software, It's such a joke. And we've got emails from this FBI agent where he's talking about literally how he's going to be, he needs a big case, and then he's going to transition from the FBI into the private sector. He's talking to another agent in text messages where he's saying, I'm going to run this as a TEI, whether I get approval or not. That's terrorism enterprise investigation. So he already knew when he opened the case that he wanted it to be a terrorism enterprise investigation, although they also admit there was no plot until 5 months into this investigation. So how did you know it was going to be a terrorism enterprise investigation, which, by the way, gives them the full resources of the FBI to, be brought to bear on these really working class, almost indigent men. Like, one of them is homeless, living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop. He has no resources, no ability to conduct a terror attack. And then he's saying things like, oh, he's going to fly Whitmer over the lake on a kite. Oh, yeah.
Dangerous kites.
We're going to get a Black Hawk and a Huey, and we're going to commandeer the airspace and shoot down airships. Like, okay, sure.
We're going to put her in a catapult.
Yeah, we're going to get a contingent of 200 men and storm the Capitol. Like, sure, that was going to happen. This is literally what they used against them.
We're going to drop her in a moat with alligators. That'll teach her. Yeah. What's funny is
that'll be called a conspiracy.
That thing about hearsay is interesting, because in the wire that they used on me, they tried to insinuate that I was plotting a civil war or something like that, even though at the end of the recording I say, by the way, I don't actually want a civil war. I was joking with my roommate, who, despite being left of center, I considered him a friend, but he was a BLM supporter, and he would constantly talk about wanting sectarian conflict and stuff like that, burn it all down. It's interesting, because I have recordings of him talking about wanting a black revolution in America. And I'm like, I would play along with it as a straight man, but here in this situation, they were able to record the opposite. And I made clear at the end of the conversation that I don't want a civil war, but what they were able to do, they were able to chop those transcripts up to deny me bail and portray me as a public menace. And another thing, that was in the recordings is he actually straight up says, "So what was the plan? What was the purpose of taking the Capitol?" And I'm just like, there wasn't one.
What?
I straight up say, I had no plan. They shot at us and we got pissed. And that's the only reason people did anything. Despite me saying that there was no criminal intent for anything on January 6th, at least from my perspective, they were still able to charge me with that stupid obstruction charge, which SCOTUS tossed out. And that was in the recording, and that should have been tossed out. But because, like you just said, if it's on the recording and it's beneficial to me, well, that's just hearsay. You could have been you could have
Yes.
just been saying that because you're lying to cover your ass. Well, then why would you listen to the other side of it? What if I'm admitting to
Exactly.
something that makes me look bad? That shouldn't be considered either. But that, no, that's not considered hearsay. And
Yeah.
I was thinking like the Oath Keepers, and actually there were a couple defendants in those chat groups. You clearly had feds in there that were trying to say things to set people up. In the Oath Keepers chat groups, you had this guy. I think it was 1% Watchdog or 3% watchdog, some stupid like thing like that. And so this guy Watchdog, he's never identified, but he's connected to two J6ers. He was in the Oath Keepers, and this is mentioned in Jessica Watkins' case, but it was also mentioned for Ryan Nichols. Ryan Nichols said that this Watchdog guy was trying to get him involved in J6. And you had people who were,
Watchdog, huh?
yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
like wolf
he's been
watch.
watching. Yeah. Woo! It's like, but it's like you had in Nichols in the case of Ryan Nichols as well. He said that there was this guy who turned out to be an FBI informant slash journalist or something like that. He was
Wow.
encouraging him to wear the outfit he wore, the battle rattle, and all that.
Oh, wow.
He was encouraging him to wear that to the Capitol, and of course that guy was never charged with conspiracy and stuff like that. You had people, and I think again, I learned this because of Will Pope's filings. I had read my statement of facts, but usually in the J6 statements of facts, you have FBI agents or investigating officers, and they'll say something like, "Hi, I'm Officer such and such. I've been empowered to investigate crime at the Capitol." Blah blah blah. In my case, the NCIS agent who investigated me, he said, "I am Lieutenant Colonel such and such, and I was on duty on January 6th. I'm investigating Timothy Hale." And then you have this with several FBI and I guess JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force guys. There's like a handful of J6 defendants where the officers investigating their case write in the statement of facts that they were specifically on duty on January 6th. So there's this open
Hmm.
question of, were these feds following us? Were they actually there that day? What were they doing? And the government refuses to answer what they were actually doing. In my case, I wouldn't be surprised if I was being followed. There was, it wasn't a secret I was going to the Capitol. It wasn't a secret that I was going to DC. Everybody knew that I was going to listen to Trump speak. It was a surprise to me that there was going to be a protest and then a riot, but I knew that there was going to be a speech. So it's not like, and from my perspective, like, why would that even be a secret? So everybody knew that, and I told you about how my employer kind of weaponized that to get rid of me. And
Mhm.
when I was at the Capitol, there was a point where I think it was by the Northwest Scaffolding. Someone came up to me and they're like, "Hey, are you in the military?" I was just like, "What? Why you at?" And they just disappeared. And I'm like,
That's
"Was that
weird.
because?" I was like, "It was because I think I had like a military haircut at the time." I was like, "Okay, maybe that's why." But it was a very strange thing, and then they just disappeared. And so I don't know if you followed the Kyle Rittenhouse case, but there was a moment where there was evidence produced, and it was like they provided video that was very pixelated. Like they had altered the video so that it was harder to identify what was happening in the background. And you can imagine why they might do that. They did the same thing with me. So at my trial, they introduced video that was never provided to the defense, and it was used to identify me, but it was extremely pixelated. Everything was pixelated. You couldn't see the people around me. And I'm like,
Wow.
why are you showing this? There's no government video. Why is and I'm gonna assume that one, the video was taken probably by a confidential source who was on the ground right by me. And
Yep.
you know, and also there were probably people around me who were also feds or federal informants, and they don't want them to be identified. To this day, I still can't get my hands on that video, even though it was presented at my
Wow.
trial.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, there's a defendant named Guy Reffitt as well. His son, I guess, was informing on him to the FBI before January 6th.
Oh my
So
god.
it seems like there are defendants
Wow.
that were being watched before January 6th.
That would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, so I don't doubt that that a lot of us were probably on watch lists beforehand, and they were just waiting for the opportunity because there were clearly discrepancies.
Oh no, he cut out. No, that's not right.
Can you hear me
There you
now?
go. Yes. No
All
worries.
right. I don't
Remember,
know.
pre-recording, I can edit it out. So just pick up right
Yeah,
where you left
I don't
off.
know. Um, I don't forgot where I left.
Guy Reffitt.
Yeah. So Guy Reffitt, his son was informing on him to the FBI before January 6th, and so it would not surprise me if there were people who are watching a certain subset of J6 defendants before January 6th. Um,
Oh, I don't doubt it at
obviously,
all.
I mean, obviously, you have the organizations, the far right militias, like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys or whatever. But then you had people like Reffitt who described themselves as three percenters. That's not a real thing, by the way. There's no the three percenters. That's not a real
No,
group,
it's
And
not.
so yeah, but it's a good headline. Oh, three percenters. And so I think that
Right.
a lot of people who called themselves that were probably also on the chopping block.
They
So
absolutely were. We are like we know from the Whitmer case, for example, there was something called Operation Bronze Griffin. This was admitted to in congressional testimony. This came out that this was a real thing. This was put on by the big tech companies where they were flagging keywords and giving that information without a warrant, of course, to the federal government. And that the FBI was putting people into a database. And they also appear to say that they gave their informant access to this database because it had targets in it of people they wanted to target who had also been flagged on basically on social media. So if they were using certain keywords, I'm sure 3%er was one of them. Barry Croft happened to refer to himself as a 3%er. Not that he was in any group, but he had like the 3%er tattoo on his hand. That, of course, they said was a terrorist symbol. And then, of course, the FBI, the fake national militia they create, is literally called the United States Patriot Three Percenters. So, yeah, it's a little weird.
yeah,
And if
it's
they were
it's a
putting people in a database back then in 2020, it wouldn't surprise me if people were picked up on that and had been monitored prior to January 6th. And also, I
yeah.
should add at this point that the sack of the Detroit field of the sorry the Detroit field office, who was overseeing the fake storming of the Capitol in Michigan in April of 2020. He 1 week
He got
after
he
the
got
guys
promoted to
were
DC, didn't
arrested,
he?
yeah, Dan Tuono becomes the assistant director of the Washington, D.C. field office to oversee another storming of the Capitol on January 6th. He also participates in the Mar-a-Lago raid, and then he leaves the FBI to become a consultant for KPMG, which I find weird. If you were a career agent and you do the Whitmer case, so you get a big case, and then you get promoted to D.C., why wouldn't you stay at D.C.? You know,
Why indeed?
why would you leave the FBI right after being promoted to go into the private sector? And then, of course, after he did the Mar-a-Lago raid, he then comes forward as a whistleblower to say, well, I think we went too far there, and to pretend that he had some concerns about it, and that's why maybe he was leaving the FBI. And they did closed door testimony with him that was, I believe, not under oath. It should have been, but they did not really press him on the Whitmer case, and I think the way that they should have. And they kind of just took what he said at face value. And I don't trust Dan Tuono at all.
Yeah, I don't trust. I've noticed the past few years there are a lot of whistleblowers from a lot of these groups, and I don't particularly trust. If you got perfectly honest, I don't trust whistleblowers. I was a whistleblower, and I know what happened to me. I don't think whistleblowers generally are actually whistleblowers. I think they're usually controlled opposition. And so I think that there's certain people who've been coming out about the whatever different agencies. And so I think they generally put them out there to, kind of like a predictive programming sort of thing. Like we'll tell a little bit of the truth and then we'll hide the majority of the story and then give them fluff and they'll forget about it. Um, yeah, that sounds pretty. It sounds like that's probably what happened there. Um, and then it's interesting. I mean, there's always it's always interesting the way the timing works with these sorts of things. You mentioned, how he steps down. I mean, look at Christopher Wray just stepping down the day before this his FBI report comes up.
I mean, come on. It's a little
Yeah,
too on the nose.
right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't. And by the way, that report, there are a lot of reasons I doubt the validity of that report, and I'll get into some of that. First off, they said 26, but what's interesting is like how they downplay even that by saying what only 3 or 4 of them were actually asked to be there. The rest of them just happened to materialize out of the ether, I guess. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, like, okay, sure, like
Come
I believe
on.
that. And then like yeah, only a few of them actually went in the building. We know some of them. Again, James Knowles was there with the Proud Boys or the Kansas City Proud Boys. There was
Yeah.
another one. There was another guy
He's
that was with them
texting
as
his
well.
handler as he's walking into the building.
He was right next to me. We were in the Capitol Visitor Center together. He was standing right next to me on his phone
Oh,
recording.
that's so creepy.
I never got that, by the way,
Wow.
either. That's more exculpatory evidence I never got because
Of course.
we're there. This proves that like there was no intent to insurrect because we're in the Capitol Visitor Center. There's a line of cops, and we're talking to the cops, and they're explaining why we have to leave because a lot of us, were pissed that they were attacking people outside, but a lot of us didn't even know we were doing anything wrong. So it's just like we had actually a civil conversation for like 10 minutes, and those recordings would have proven that there was no like intent to fight the cops and stuff like that. But again, yeah, it's just a complete, but those are Brady violations. But yeah, there were informants all over the place on the Capitol grounds inside the building. I talked about that guy Troy Smocks. He denied that he was ever at the Capitol, and I just found pictures of him on a bullhorn right there. So he said, "Oh yeah, I was watching everything from binoculars at my hotel in D.C. I never actually went there though." I'm like, "You watched
Bullshit.
everything?" Yeah, a little bit. Just
Binoculars.
just a
Okay.
little. Yeah, he was just yeah, okay. Yeah,
What
he's
is he,
got it.
Harriet Spy?
Like yeah, he was like come on, like but that's just like one example. Like he was a rat in the jail, planted in there. I know there was a guy Nathan DeGrave. There were 3 rats: Nate DeGrave, Ronald Sandlin, Josiah Colt. And these guys went there, and like if you read their case law, it's so stupid. Like either so here's the thing. If you read, well, okay, so first let me skip ahead. Ronald Sandlin admitted that his co-defendant Nate DeGrave was caught in a drug conspiracy in 2020. And this is what happens with a lot of CHSs. They agree to do this stuff
Hmm.
so that they can get out of trouble for something else. So DeGrave gets
Correct.
caught in a drug conspiracy 2020. So that's why he's at the Capitol 2021. And Sandlin said that they pretty much all had the same kind of agreement going on. All right. Um, so that's why those 3 knuckleheads are there. But when you read the case law, like, well, you're denied bail because you said such and such. Clearly, there was pre-planning for this, that, and the other thing. They were there with like a bunch of cameras. It was like they were basically like a film crew. They were one of the few people actually fighting cops inside the building. Inside the building was
Wow.
actually far more peaceful than the outside of the building. People just wandered around. There's some of the few people who went out of their way to fight cops for literally no reason other than so they could record it. But when you read the case law, it's just like they're talking about, I'm down for danger. You down for danger, bro? Yeah, it's just like what the
Oh
like
God.
and by the way, like they're nerds, like they're coward, like it's just like it's the dumbest thing. One of them, uh, what was it, Nate the Grave? He was there dressed like a TIE fighter from Star Wars. He was in like this stupid costume.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
Sandlin's wearing an orange hoodie with a black motorcycle jacket over it with another orange hoodie over that. So he's taking layers off throughout the whole thing.
Wow.
It's like, but like this was purely performative. But when you read, like I said, when you read the filings and you read what the government's alleging and you read their communications, it's just like they had to have had a handler because there's
Of
definitely
course.
someone, yeah, like with just the way they meet and get together and how they coordinate everything. It's
Mhm.
very clear that this is fake case law. And that's another thing is like the feds will create stories and backgrounds for defendants, um, and which essentially helps them make case law in the first place. So by creating fake defendants, they can create fake precedents. So they were able to
Yes,
deny,
yes.
yeah. So like that 1512 charge was first applied for them. So
Wow.
me,
That
dozens of
then they
other,
used to hit everybody else.
yeah, it was Dabney Friedrich. That judge, her husband was actually involved in the Enron task force, and the Enron scandal is where the 1512 substatute came from in the first place. And then she's the one who first upholds it for federal informants, and that creates a standard for every other J6 defendant. It's like, come on, you
That's
know,
crazy.
it's but and yet there it is, and so like you see how a lot of this is just like manufactured gobbledygook. Um, I mean, there's so many different angles to go down. It's hard for me to even think of where to start. But yeah, a lot of these people were clearly there as provocateurs, but the numbers don't even make the numbers just don't make sense. I know that there had to have been more than three or
There's
four.
definitely
See,
more. I'm
yeah,
sorry, but if they use 12 informants and 3 undercovers to frame 14 men, and they could have that many there at a meeting, 3, 4 different people recording, like they're controlling every aspect of it, and they're, almost like it's a theater. It's actually Dan Chappell, the informant, and undercover agent Mark Schweers who proposed the first recon of Whitmer's vacation cottage. That is their idea that they then propose to Adam. And then they trick Eric into going. He has no idea where they're going when he first gets in the car. He'd done private security work with Adam before, and they'd also been tracking BLM protesters that were coming in, and staying at hotels. So they say to him, we're going to check out a high profile vacation cottage. He in his mind is thinking, oh, BLM's changing tactics. They're not staying at hotel now. Now they're getting Airbnbs or something. We're just going to go look, because they talked to like sheriffs in their area. They had a rapport with them of like letting people know if you see something suspicious. So
yeah,
he didn't think of anything of it. When the FBI informant who's driving the vehicle comes and picks him up, then he doesn't find out till they're on the way there. And then, of course, what's he supposed to do? This informant is armed in the front seat. Adam is in the passenger seat, and he's, all giddy and acting like a child. And Eric has no idea, like, if this is a dangerous situation. So he just does what he has to do. But, like, we have text messages of the agent Chambers telling the informant Dan to try to who to invite. Oh, try to invite this person, that person, try to get this person to go. So they literally planned the recon of Whitmer's vacation cottage, and also they coordinated with the governor and her staff on a date and time for the recon that would be convenient to her. So she is more of a co-conspirator with the FBI in her own fake kidnapping plot than these guys are who got duped into going on a ride. And then, they drive them up by Whitmer's vacation cottage on the nighttime recon, which comes from the Luther FTX, also put on by the FBI, complete with undercover agents and informants orchestrating this. They do the nighttime recon. And the FBI, because they could only get Eric roped into the daytime one, and they had all these people they wanted to invite, they say, oh, we're going to do another Barry was told they're going to do land navigation training, so he doesn't know. The Indiana target, Tim Sayer, an undercover, actually told him, hey, we're going to go do this land nav training. You want to come with us? And he thought something was odd about it. And so he chose to stay. He didn't like the tone and the vibe of how things changed from the earlier FTX to that night. And he tried to tell Barry, I don't think you should go. But of course, Barry being Barry is like, oh, land navigation training. So he gets roped into going, and we have
land
the
nav is
messages,
fun. I enjoy some land
right?
nav
Yeah,
myself.
so they made these events, by the way, things you would want to go to. Like the FTXs are fun. You're doing target practice, you're getting medical training, there's useful aspects to it. One of these was billed as a family friendly event with a little girl's birthday party in it. But, anyways, like they're literally, the agents are overseeing every aspect of this whole thing. So if they're doing that in the Whitmer case, they could very easily be doing that on January 6th, coordinating and overseeing this nonsense with these informants. I mean, they're wearing live wires, they can easily communicate with each other. And this is the lengths that they're willing to go to try to get these people to cross the line into something that they could charge them for. So we've got messages, the informants we claim they claim didn't know about each other. Oh, Dan didn't know Steve was an informant. Steve didn't know Jenny was an informant. Blah, 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 bullshit. They're all sitting there talking about who's going to go in what vehicle on the FBI's planned nighttime recon. The agents themselves are texting saying, oh, drive them up this way where we've got low light ambience because we've got the pool cams installed in advance. So they put the pool cams up on her property and they're like theatrically orchestrating a movie. Yeah, pick them up in the vehicles, put this person in this car, this person in that car, have them drive up and, get them this way so we can get them on camera. We have the messages. They're even texting the informant the governor's address because these guys didn't even know it. Oh, but they were plotting something, right? They were going to kidnap her. Sure thing. And so if they are orchestrating to this degree and they have, we've got them in text saying, you got to get out and focused. And they're trying to get them to move from talking into prosecutorial acts. So they offer the use of a $5,000 prepaid credit card to try to get them to purchase gear for training. But what they really wanted was a large purchase of firearms and ammunition that they could say they were buying in preparation of a kidnapping, because there was nothing anybody was doing to actually plot or plan a kidnapping. They're just people talking shit at these events put on by the FBI. There's nothing that anyone's actually doing where you could say, oh, they're planning, so they want to do something. Like, no, the opposite. Some of these informants are suggesting that, we fire rounds into the governor's house, or we put tannerite in her driveway and shoot it and blow it up to scare them, and we mail her the shell casings. Like, they're suggesting things like this. And some of these guys are saying, nope, we're not going to be black bagging politicians, taking them out of their cars, getting arrest warrants, trying to arrest them. We're not doing it. Paul says that, and then he creates his own group, which the FBI calls a ghost group. This is in July of 2020. The FBI admits that there was no plan until August of 2020. He moves at the end of July to South Carolina. He gets arrested and charged anyway, a 21-year-old Army veteran, and he's now in prison and could be in prison until 2063 for, quote, providing material support to a non-existent plot.
Yeah, just like providing false testimony if you lose a trial. Yeah, it's I had mentioned this at a space the other night. One of the ways I think they're getting around with the fake numbers is that they could say, oh, well, we literally actually did pay or order like this small amount of people to be over here. The other numbers could be in other patriot groups that were infiltrated who were not at the Capitol initially, that maybe wandered to the area after the fact. Like maybe they met with a patriot group from, let's say, Michigan or wherever, and they were meeting at the Ellipse, because there were a lot of different state organizations and team-ups, meetups and stuff like that were happening all throughout DC. And I know that because that's a lot of defendants. They were meeting people that they were familiar with from local protest groups and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these groups had basically rats planted inside them along for the ride, and they just happened to end up in DC that day, and then they made their way over to the area. I think that's more than likely true. And that this is, of course, ignoring the fact that we know that they had undercover MPD, the electronic surveillance unit, undercover Capitol PD. There are body cameras where the cops are talking about, hey, what do your guys look like? The undercover ones. What are they wearing? We know that there are reports that the CIA had assets deployed that day. There's supposedly pictures of Bureau of Prisons of people deployed in their battle rattle there.
Wow.
You had there were Defense Intelligence Agency assets there. You could, like some of these influencers today, like Ivan Reichland, he was in the DIA. I don't think that's a coincidence. You had people there from pretty much every agency, department, bureau. And we know, again, I'm sure you've seen Will stuff like with John Guinaldo. He was a retired FBI guy. Yeah, okay, he's retired. Maybe I believe that. But there's three other FBI guys who are on active duty standing right behind them, the guys that were clapping when the East Side got breached, and then they go up there themselves as well. So we know that there were absolutely FBI agents who were there present that day. There were the DEA was there. There were all kinds of agencies there. So these numbers, I don't give them any credence, but I'm happy that they at least released it because it's just a little, just a teeny tiny bit more confirmation bias for me.
Yeah.
It confirms that what we all knew, that there were assets there, even though the number's wrong. And two, because the number's wrong, it just emboldens me to demand even further that we actually take control of these departments and agencies and such, and get the real numbers.
Yes.
That's
And
This is
I
why I'm
will
not that
add,
popular. I'm not that popular with the blanket pardon crew, because I want the lists of names before, and like, I don't think it'd be that hard to just take two lists, defendants and then rats, and then subtract the rats from the list. I don't think that, but some people are really opposed to that for some reason. I don't know why.
I don't know why they would be. I don't know why you would want to pardon somebody who was there to orchestrate and set up other people. I don't think that's right. But I will say, we know from Jesse Trentadu's, lengthy litigation with the FBI trying to get information about what happened to his brother. This, of course, is from Oklahoma City. But one of the things that he was able to get out of the FBI is the admission of the existence of the sensitive informant program. Sorry. And this, of course, ties into the CHSs because the sensitive informant program talked about the FBI cultivating assets, in places like literally the news media, in court, like at courthouses. So you could have somebody, right, who's supposed to be a prosecutor or even a defense attorney that is also part of the FBI's sensitive informant program. You could have a judge or a judge's clerk or what have you. Like, this is a thing, and we know that there were at least one person who was in the news media who was, reporting on Oklahoma City when that happened, who was an asset for the FBI. And so if that's the case back then, and they had this sensitive informant program, I find it very concerning because I look at how the entire, trial was set up for the Whitmer guys, where they were prevented from, having exculpatory evidence brought in, where things were taken out of context to string together a narrative, where the FBI at the retrial of Adam and Barry actually admitted to planting evidence on Barry and Adam so they could seize it later when they arrested him. And they just admitted it so that if the defense said it, it wouldn't be like a damaging revelation like it was at the first trial. I don't think these retrials should be allowed to happen. If there's a mistrial on two people and two people are acquitted at one trial, then no, you shouldn't be able to retry the people that there was a mistrial on. Those charges should be dropped because it's unfair if you already know what the defense's strategy is going to be. We also have reason to believe, of course, that the FBI was spying on the defense team and kind of seemed to know what they were going to do before, they should have. We actually know from filings that Paul Beller, his lawyer, has made filings saying when he was trying to talk to Paul, who was moved to FCI Schuylkill on the eve of his appeal, despite not being charged federally, he was only charged at the state level, but they sent all three of these guys to federal BOP facilities across the country on the eve of their appeals to make it difficult for their lawyers to speak with them, to meet with them, for their families to see them, and to kind of shut them up. He said that when he was trying to call Paul, the phones were being monitored by a third party. We know who the third party is. These are supposed to be attorney-client privileged phone calls, and yet the FBI is there listening in. Why? Why were they moved? There's all these things that are happening that make me think, the FBI probably has informants at the Bureau of Prisons, probably has informants, in the court system. I mean, who knows? It's very disturbing. We've also seen the FBI admitted, and I posted the document on Twitter, that they ran an informant at one of the defense attorneys and then self-reported it in their file. Why did they do that? And which attorney was it? I think I know who it was, but they don't say. But so it's just, if that's the case for these other things, then, I look at January 6th and think, yeah, there's probably similar activity, not just the event itself, but then in the ensuing investigation, which after the Whitmer case, which they said was the biggest domestic terror case in a generation, then January 6th became the biggest investigation in the history of the DOJ and FBI, where they used all 56 field offices for the FBI and for the DOJ there.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
don't
quite a
know.
big thing.
I don't even know like all the specific the laws out of Michigan, but I would think like there is the saying that a judge is the 13th juror. He should the judge should have just thrown these charges out once it became extremely clear that the entrapment was there, instead of constantly retrying these people and doing this, that, and the other thing. The what's interesting is that, like, kind of like what I said with the NPR thing. I think that I mean, first off, we know the history with Mockingbird and stuff like that, but I have no doubt that there were also people who were reporting on, say, for January 6th, who were also, human sources, let's say. So, I
Like
mean,
maybe Ryan Riley.
I was
Just
literally
saying.
just I was just gonna say that. That's the
I
big
like to
thing now.
name and shame them. Sorry.
I do too. Yeah, it was and the rat who reports on me at NPR. His name is Dreisbach. I think he's a rat. He came to my trial all the way from California and was like sitting behind
Wow.
my aunt trying to listen to her.
What a freak.
And, like, yeah, they're creeps.
Yeah,
And
they
like
do stuff like this.
yeah, they still write hit pieces about me. Like, I served my time, my case is done. They're still writing hit pieces about me. They're obsessed with me. But yeah, like that's a perfect example. And of course, Riley, again, I've never met him, but he wrote the book about the sedition hunters. And like the sedition hunters, we know just from public reporting as well that they were not just rats who were getting paid to set people or to inform on people and turn them into the feds, but a lot of them were out of country. So you have potentially foreign intelligence agencies and involved in this as well. And so, like,
Yes.
yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. And keep in mind too, there's plenty of video we have. And granted, this is the United States, everybody comes here, but like there's video from January 6th. There were Ukrainians who were present. There were people from the Five Eyes alliance countries, like New Zealand and all that. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you had intelligence assets, Israel, whatever, all our allies, the Nine Eyes, the Five Eyes, all the different eyes. I wouldn't be surprised if there were, elements from all over the freaking world that were there as part of some giant. Because keep in mind, like, yeah, of course, the United States engages in color revolutions all around the world. But this
Yep.
is kind of the first time that something to that scale was done here in the United States, to our knowledge. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was an instrument, like there was an ungodly amount of assets that were involved, not just American assets, but foreign assets, and not just intelligence, but yeah,
Right.
journalistic. When you watch the video, like I don't know how much of J6 video you've actually watched, but there's a staggering amount of journalists per square foot. The amount of
Wow.
the amount of videographers, like everywhere, cameras everywhere. With
That's crazy.
the funniest thing, like when you watch the first breach of the Capitol, where so they break the window in, and oh, it's terrible. They break the window in. You know what? If you watch the CCTV, there's a hallway. It's called the Senate Wing Door Hallway, and a cop runs up to the door as one person, a couple people, they come in, but one person drops in, and the cop pulls out a like little rinky dink thing of mace. He sprays it, and then he runs away. Well, if you look right behind him, there's 5 photographers. There's 5 photographers who are there standing with that
Holy
cop at the first
cow.
breach site. It's just like, gee, I wonder, was this staged at all?
They
Is
just
it possible?
happened to be there.
Just happened to be 5 photographers, and it was like he was holding it like he was posing to, and then
Oh my
they
God.
just leave. But I mean, but yeah, there's photographers all over the place. Now, of course, it's a historic day. It's a certification vote. I mean, it's not that historically important. Like nobody cares that much. But there were so many people there, and I guess maybe a lot of them probably had like press credentials or whatever. But it's just kind of interesting because like in my own video from my phone, when I look back on it and I rewatch it, I'm like, wow, there were so many photographers, like just literally everywhere. How come they didn't get
That's a
charged?
little weird.
Yeah,
Right,
how
that too. They'll charge journalists who have ideas they don't like. That's
right.
fine. But then those stenographers, that's what I call them. They're just government stenographers. They're allowed to be there to document the event, because
Yeah,
that's what they're there for,
and they're
to get their
everywhere.
photo ops.
They always get the right shot. They just happen to be freaking everywhere.
Yeah, like Richard Barnett putting his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk after somebody encouraged him and told him to do it.
right.
gassed him
And
up about it. And then
we're
they
and
get that
Megan
photo off, and
Paradise.
that poor guy.
Right. And where's Megan
Yeah.
Paradise? She I believe she encouraged him to do that as well. And she turned her phone into the FBI and nothing happens. You know what's funny? Is I always loved Adam Carolla. I was a big fan of the Man Show when I was inappropriately watching it as a child. And like I like Adam Carolla, but I'm like, hey, uh, why did your niece Megan Paradise not get charged for January 6th? And
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, wow, I
They're
didn't
rela-
know that.
yeah, that was like always up the air. It's like, well, that's a nice coincidence. But like I'm like I messaged him on Twitter. I'm like, hey, how come she didn't like what did she say? And like when like why didn't she get charged for J6 after such and such with the FBI? And he responds like sarcastically, he's like, I don't know, I was up the street by then. And I was just like, oh, that's at least he had it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I thought it was a funny response. But it's just like obviously he's not going to throw his family member under the bus for being a rat,
Yeah,
but still like
right. But
but that but
it's still,
yeah,
you
she was
know
like, I believe she, along with Ray Epps, like a lot of them were on like these FBI lists or whatever that they put out after J6, like but
yes.
then they just get removed and nobody
And
asks
I
questions.
attended Rayup's sentencing, and it was the weirdest thing ever. He didn't have to show up. His lawyer didn't have to be present. They literally had a little monitor on that side of the room. It was so weird. And then, of course, Judge Boasberg, the FISA judge, is overseeing it. And it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I put a thread up on it on Twitter so people could go read that if you want. I encourage you to do so, because the way that they portray Ray Epps and the apologies for him from the prosecution, where they're like, well, like when that flag went by, that other people were charged for their hand touching it, but when Ray Epps did, oh well, it was just passing overhead, and he didn't mean to, it was an accident. It was so bizarre.
Yeah, I've
It
never seen the feds and the media apologize to a J6 defendant. Never have I seen that. There actually
you give him a
there's another exception.
60 minute special.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this man, his life has been destroyed by these conspiracy theories. It's like, my life has been destroyed by the government's conspiracy theories. What are you talking about? And I'll
Right.
say there's one other exception, I guess, where the government clearly was running defense for a guy, and that was Zach Alam. He's the Antifa guy that broke the window where Babbitt got shot. And
Oh, wow.
they like even like Riley and like all of them, they're like, oh, you see the result of conspiracy theories. This man's life has been ruined. He just got sentenced to such and such, and oh, there's this false theory that he was an Antifa member. So it's just like he told me he was Antifa. I was in jail with him. I know he was Antifa. It's not a conspiracy theory. Anyway, but yeah, that's just like it's weird how I don't know. But yeah, they clearly you've never treated a defendant like they've treated Ray Epps. They didn't even want to prosecute him. Everybody
Right.
was calling it out for years until they finally charged him. He gets
Yep.
charged with a rinky-dink misdemeanor. And yeah,
Yep.
like you said, they admitted he engaged in felonious activity.
Yes,
Everybody
they
I
did.
know who everybody I know who even touched that sign got charged with an assault. I
Yes.
was in prison with a guy named Marshall Neff. Um, he had touched the sign. Anybody who pushed it, like even if you touched it like to push it over you because so it wouldn't hit
Right.
you,
Yes.
you got hit
You
with that
still
111B. Yeah,
right, because they said it was pushed into law enforcement or something, if I remember correctly. So
yeah.
yes, which
But
is
Epps,
ridiculous, but of course not Epps.
yeah, and he
No, not
wasn't
Ray
just
Epps.
touching it. He was not just touching it though. He was actually pushing it pretty clearly. Get in there. Like he was actually pushing it. So I don't know. It's almost like it is what it is. I don't know. I think maybe he
And
could be some kind of
I
fag. I don't know.
remember too, like when this first happened and people were saying and bringing up the question of whether informants were involved, because the Whitmer guys had already been kind of getting discovery in their case, and that was coming out how many informants were used there. I think people started questioning this and were called conspiracy theorists. Then they admitted, oh, there may have been one or two that day. The New York Times guy, Alan Fuhr, I think is his name. He writes the article on the Kansas City Proud Boys informant. Oh, it was just this one person, and oh, it wasn't a big deal, and the FBI wasn't orchestrating it. And then here we are. They were saying it was a conspiracy theory to even suggest that this could happen. Now we're at the stage where they're like, well, yeah, there was like 26 undercovers, but that's it. There are 26 CHSs, but that's it.
They weren't
Undercovers,
asked to
and
be there. They just showed up. They
they
just
were
showed up
just
to work. That's
there.
all. Yeah,
Yeah,
they don't
none
they
of
didn't
them
want the
were
time off.
charged.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
You
it's
know,
going to continue to be more of these admissions of like, well, we'll admit to the least thing we've done while burying the most egregious, and then they keep getting called on it and having to admit more and more. And I
we,
feel like now it's been 4 years. This should have been done much sooner. And I have to say, I'm very disappointed in the weaponization committee that they did not have the balls to investigate the Whitmer case, which should have been very easy for them with, 5 of these men acquitted by 2 different juries. Hello, it's like handed to them on a freaking platter. The text
yeah.
messages of the agent saying mission is to kill the governor and all this other stuff. There's no better case than that they could have taken up. They refused to investigate January 6th to this day. I'm very disappointed
Well,
in
they're
that.
cowards in that the whole committee is toothless. I think it was Jim Jones was like Jones, for instance, like he at Ohio, like his constituent, again, Jessica Watkins, the defendant I was incarcerated with, Jess, was brought up to him and he showed absolutely no interest at all in the due process violations that, one of his constituents was going through. So, I mean, I think that, again, it's all performative. In Congress, you don't get praise for what you actually do. You get praise for what you say and then don't do. What's
Yeah.
funny is it's like regarding this whole, the whole situation here, it just like kind of reminds me of that meme where it's just like, it's not happening. Okay, it might be happening, but it's in limited quantities. It's happening, but you don't understand. It's happening and it's a good thing. And, it's like, that's,
Yep.
pretty soon it's going to be like, well, it's a good thing that there were feds there to entrap people.
That's exactly what they're going to say. That's what they said with the Whitmer thing. Well, yeah, they did use 12 informants, but that was a good thing because look at these dangerous militia groups. They actually made that argument at the retrial of Adam and Barry when they were trying to kind of take the sails out of these, what would have been, bigger defense revelations about the case. They just started admitting to it. Yes, we planted, the bag of explosives material on Barry, obviously, so we could seize it later when we arrested them. Like, oh yeah, we just do that. We just plant stuff on people and then charge them with having explosives materials. And by the way, the explosives materials put in a Wisconsin shipping company bag. So we know that came from the informant Steve Robeson out of Wisconsin. Barry doesn't live there. It was things like tannerite, BBs, black powder, all things you can literally legally buy at like Walmart and a sporting goods store. And they admit that it was all purchased legally and that you could drive home from the store with it in your vehicle. They just argue intent. Oh, well, he was going to do something with it. And it's like, this is where we're at. And I think people don't realize that. And they don't understand. They think that, well, if these guys were arrested, they must have did something. Or they see the kind of rants that they put out on Facebook that was constantly played at trial to make them look bad, that is really out of context, that doesn't represent who these people are. They're kind of unsympathetic characters, though. They're not glamorous, they're not attractive, they're just working class guys. So I think it was really hard for people to understand that no, you should be advocating for them. These people were framed, they had their rights violated. Really, it was a conspiracy against their rights by the federal government, who conspired every step of the way to set these people up and take them from their families. It's like shameful and disgusting, but there were a lot of people on the right who just don't mention that their case, they forgot about them, or they just don't really care. And they're like, well, they must have been doing something. That's their thinking even now. And that's really embarrassing, I think, at this point. But hopefully, conversations like this will wake people up to how bad things really are as far as the level of what I don't want to use a curse word, what the FBI is doing.
I'll
That's a
do it.
nicer way of
No,
saying it.
it was funny. When I was in the jail, my buddy in there, Pete Schwartz, he was getting snitched on with this guy named Brian Mock. We called him Agent Mock, and he wrote like this 40-page report on Pete, basically accusing him of crimes he wasn't even charged with, and basically he basically was going to send that into the court. and it didn't go his way after, because he made it very clear what he was doing. He actually shoves the motion in Pete's face and says, "This is for your own good." And it's just
Oh my
like
God.
it's just like the mindset there. Like it's a good thing. Like I was just reminded of that. And unfortunately, the way that was handled in the jail is not how it's handled for lying prosecutors and federal agents. But I'm not going to say, but there's a saying about what happens when you do that sort of thing. You know, it involves stitch. Anyway, I think that a lot of the guys on the right, because they're controlled opposition, a lot of the media assets and those who, like, here's the thing, like even with J6, immediately after J6, people like Ben Shapiro were saying, I hope they burn in hell and they deserve to rot in
Yep.
prison for the rest of their life. They should be charged to the fullest extent of the law, ABC, like all the things. And they bought into the same narrative. And frankly, I think that they are all controlled opposition and they're gatekeepers. And at the end of the day, they weren't expecting Trump to make a comeback. And I think that a lot of these people, like we would be in jail and we'd be, like have these crappy little $3 radios and or whatever it was. And then like we would listen to like these late night shows. One was like called Red Eye. And you're like, yeah, we're tough. We're American. And then also it's like, we don't want to talk about election fraud in here because that's a conspiracy theory. And also the J6 is really bad.
Of
And
course.
I
We're not allowed to question the integrity of the election.
yeah, let's not go against any official narratives because that would be wrong.
That would just be crazy.
It's not like conservatism as its bedrock is questioning, things. But yeah, what I think happened is that for the longest time, and here's the thing, unfortunately, like I wish that more people would talk about the Whitmer guys, and I think they deserve to be pardoned. And I think that the full extent of everything that went on should be made public, just like with J6. But the reality, unfortunately, has been that they haven't been part of a larger political conversation since it was used to, smear the right from the last election. But because J6 was the newer thing, it became a talking point in the 2024 election. And because Trump wouldn't stop talking about it, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and a couple other congressmen were willing to talk about it. It kind of moved the Overton window, and so it became okay not only to question the excesses of J6, it also became okay to question what even happened in the first place. And so questioning the narrative with J6 basically became the norm. And so, like I said, the Overton window shifted, and I think that was just an inevitability because of the nature of the Trump run for the White House. So unfortunately, like I think that, and again, I think that the Trump team should advocate for the Whitmer guys, and I think that they're, if I had to bet, I would say they're probably going to get some relief. But I think, the truth is that if Trump didn't run again, nobody would have given a crap about J6. People would have people would have been tired of it. They would have just agreed with the narrative, moved on, and it would have just been, yeah, J6 was bad, but guys, like, what about BLM and Antifa? And that's just like all we heard while we were in jail. That's all it was. It was the right was just deflect. They wouldn't address what actually happened. They would just deflect. It would be like, well, yeah, it was terrible what they did on J6 guys, but I mean, that was one thing. You have all these other things. It's like, well, instead of doing the whataboutism, why don't you challenge it on the face of it? Because it was clearly it's clearly fake, but they didn't do that. Yeah. So I think ultimately, the right in America, there's no right. I mean, I don't know where you stand on this, but I don't think it's controversial to say there's no genuine left in America and there's no genuine right. It's just corporate kleptocrats.
There's no real opposition to like what's happening to us.
Yeah,
not really. Not by anybody.
Yeah,
in a position of influence or power.
Progressives on the left are the minority, and on the right, traditionalists have absolutely no voice. It's all capitalist centrism or whatever you want to call it. It's just like, so yeah, I don't think there are real dissident voices, but I think that just the nature of the last political calendar forced J6 to come into question, and that allowed the general public, who typically don't hear anything from the radio or the TV. I think that also kind of jump started more skepticism in their minds, because unfortunately it's just like, if you're like a middle class American, like if you just Like, let's say you're one of the guys from the Whitmer thing. Like, you're just a regular blue collar American. You don't have a real voice, and you definitely don't
No,
have definitely don't have real outlets speaking for you in the traditional right wing media. You got to rely on people
right.
on podcasts or stuff like this. Like, but otherwise, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like I think that the election itself kind of forced their hand, but otherwise they wouldn't have given a damn. So that anyway, that's my take on that. I think they're all the same.
Yeah, I agree. And I know, I've got statements for the weaponization committee from Adam and Barry when they were still in Nuevo County before their sentencing. And I published those. And then Ken Silva from Headline USA wrote an article about it. The next day, Adam and Barry were moved to supermax prisons across the country. My home was swatted twice, which has never happened before.
Mm.
Yeah. So things like that happen. Um, but this is like, I think people don't understand how bad it is, or on our side there's a tendency to like downplay where we are, how bad things are. And there's a lot of like FBI apologists, or people who still think that the FBI should exist. All of these Republicans, they still vote to fund the FBI after they go on TV and they lambaste them. Then they're approving their new headquarters that's going to be twice the size of the Pentagon. Really? Okay, you're going to continue to fund them, and then you pretend that you care about them and their overreach. But those statements that I got from the guys, I tried to get them to the weaponization committee. I never got any kind of response. And so it's sad, because those families, they don't have any way to really reach these people or to try to advocate for their loved ones. They're all, working class people, and they're busy working because so much of their money has to go into the Bureau of Prisons now for their fines for something that didn't happen. And then if you want to have them have commissary, I mean, it's a lot to deal
Yeah,
with. And
yeah, it
for
is.
these families, they took away the main breadwinners of their household. So, like, the wives are working now and also raising kids who don't have fathers and grandfathers. So, it's very difficult and very sad. And I was sad to see that not more people on our side have reached out to see if they could help these men or to do anything for them. Even the 5 guys who've been acquitted, their lives are still being destroyed. Eric lost custody of his kids. He's never gotten that back. They can't get jobs. They're probably still on some kind of a domestic terror list or whatever, even after their acquittals, because one of them will get a job and everything will be going fine, and then all of a sudden they get fired. So these things are happening still now today. The guys who are trying to appeal, the state of Michigan keeps messing with them, and unfortunately Trump cannot pardon those guys that were charged at the state level. And so there's all this weird stuff that is happening, and it's still happening. And it would be nice if one of these elected officials did something about it or said something about it. But I do have hope with Kash Patel coming into the FBI that at least maybe we can get some cleaning up of the FBI and actually get some of this information released. There's still a lot of exculpatory evidence that is kept under protective seal even now. Even though all 4 trials are over with that came from the Whitmer case, it's completely adjudicated. We're now in the appeals process. They're still keeping stuff under protective seal. Why? Well, it's because it reveals the extent of their criminality. That is why. And that's not acceptable to me, that they should be allowed to do that. And I'm sure there's similar things happening with the January 6 cases as well, that many of these people had exculpatory evidence withheld, or people who wanted to testify for them on their behalf were threatened, intimidated, because that's what happened with the Whitmer guys. People who attended a meeting or an FTX but weren't charged, they wanted to testify about what happened and what they witnessed, what they saw, and they were told they were unindicted co-conspirators, and if they testified, they could be charged, and they actually could be arrested leaving the courthouse that day. And so they just one by one pled the fifth because they were scared, and the judge let this happen. So it's like we're not even having real trials at this point. We
Right.
have the appearance of a trial, but you don't have any of your due process rights. You are not perceived as innocent until proven guilty. You're perceived as guilty, and then you have to prove your innocence. And it's just completely backwards. And then to do so while there are all these rulings that prevent you from introducing the evidence of how you were framed. They didn't want them to be able to actually utter the word entrapment at one of the trials. They couldn't say that they were entrapped. Like at the state trial for Joe, Pete, and Paul, the government was allowed to say convicted terrorist Adam and Barry, but the state guys couldn't say, yeah, well, Brandon and Daniel were acquitted. But the government was still showing them in video and documents and referring to them as co-conspirators in front of a jury without saying, no, actually, two of those guys have been acquitted. Hello, how can you still refer to them as co-conspirators when they've been acquitted? And how can you show convicted terrorists Adam and Barry, but they can't mention, no, two of these guys were acquitted at the first trial? They weren't allowed to mention that. So there's all these different things that happen that manipulate the process. And I know this happened to January 6ers as well. And I think that people need to be more aware of that, especially people who purport to be on our side, but are ignorant of these things.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much all that happened. We had protective orders, so this basically prevented any of the useful information that would that would counteract the narratives from getting out to the public. The government could leak whatever it wanted via its filings or just accidentally. You'd mentioned people, being intimidated or things happening to them. One of my supervisors for my job, who was against management, one of my old supervisors from my overnight shift, he wrote me a character letter so I could get bail, and he got fired from he got fired. The NCIS
Wow.
started. He got investigated by NCIS. The Army was investigating him because he was in
Oh
the
my
reserves.
God. Mm,
Yeah, destroyed his family. So yeah, this
that's
kind of stuff happened
terrible.
to, yeah. So I mean, I was able to reconnect with him once I got out, but it it that happens to, unfortunately, everybody. And yeah, the judges are, in the case of what they went through or what we went through, they're all political. And what's interesting with J6 is that there are a lot of district judges in DC, but only a handful deal with J6 cases. It's very
Yep.
weird how it's always the same names that are dealing
Yeah.
with the J6 cases. And you think, well, that's kind of weird. Like maybe, like why is it always these same judges? I mean, I don't know the system that well. Maybe there's a reason I can't understand, but it just seems like a lot of these judges thought that they were going to use J6 as a stepping stone in their career so that they could get promoted to higher judicial offices or get appointments and stuff like that. I think some of these people actually thought they would become Supreme Court justices. What actually happened with Ketanji Brown, actually, now that I think about it. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them thought that they were going to use it as a stepping stone in their career. Because even Trump appointee, a lot of these Trump appointee judges, um,
Yep.
not very good. Not very good.
Yep.
They
I
actually,
agree.
they're some of his biggest critics, and I think a lot of it, maybe it's because of the Federalist Society that is responsible for a lot of these suggestions. But
Hmm.
I think in the future, Trump should not appoint anybody promoted by the Federalist Society. Um, as a proud Federalist, I think that there's something going on there. I think that yeah, all those things, like, just there was it's just interesting, like the way that they try to manipulate the presentation in terms of like the thing, well, like they can't mention that they were entrapped when they, they said they were when they were entrapped. Those guys
Yeah,
with
like
Jeff
you can't
McKellop.
mount a defense if you can't say, you can't argue entrapment as your defense. Like, how do you defend yourself if they take away, oh, you can't say the word entrapment? Well, what do you say then? Like, how do you defend yourself in, they've already, prevent so much of the evidence from coming in, and then they pick the worst, moments of these people. And anyone's going to have those moments, by the way, if they're being filmed for almost an entire year and recorded. There's going to be something that you say that is untoward, and they would take that and just hammer it over and over again, play it over and over again, and it's so disgusting.
Yeah. Well, they do this in so many different kinds of ways. Like Jeff McKellop is a defendant I was locked up with. He served the military. He was in the military his entire life. He ended up becoming a CIA contractor, working with the State Department, doing black ops stuff like that. And so they basically, what happened was he on January 6th, the cops body slammed an old woman with a riot shield down a staircase, and he freaked out and started and shoved one of them. Okay, like so basically what probably 95% of all men in America would probably do if they were in that circumstance. But so what they tried to do as a pre-trial condition, the government was filing motions to deny McKillop the ability to rely on his character. So they didn't want any mention of his public service, his training, or any of his background. They basically wanted to strip him of his service, honorable service in the military and stuff like that, so that he couldn't rely on this to defend his character and his intentions on January 6th, because they obviously don't want the jury to know this guy's a decorated veteran of the Army Special Forces. Like this guy was a Ranger, he was a Green Beret, all this kind of stuff. They don't want any of that. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And by the way, a lot of people take plea deals because of what you said earlier about how, like these guys that are denied bail, for instance, so like the breadwinners, the house. Like, keep in mind too, like people don't know. At least this was the case for me when I went to prison. Actually, you have this thing called the APR payments. You have to pay your fine, and if you don't pay your fine while you're incarcerated, at least for me, I was in the Bureau of Prisons. If you don't pay your fine, you don't get commissary. So like
Yes.
you're not going to get more time in prison, but it's just going to be more miserable for you. So like,
Yep.
you want that bag of Cheetos? Well, then you better. I'm
It's
not a Cheeto guy, but
extortion.
it
They
is.
offloaded Adam's fines onto his mother, who they make pay $250 a month just for his fines. Otherwise, he doesn't get commissary. And at Florence Supermax, he's locked down 23 hours a day. If he doesn't have TV, like he'll literally lose his mind.
Yeah.
So these families are being extorted like $300 a month every month. Can you imagine that the financial burden of that, and for that to last for years?
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
That's what it was in jail. And it's just like you deny people bail. You don't
Yeah.
let them see their family. You don't let them have religious services. You don't let them see their evidence. You don't let them see their lawyer. You don't let them go to a doctor. You don't let them
And
out in
you
the
pick
sunlight.
their lawyer in many cases. The government is picking and providing your lawyer for you, your court appointed
Oh,
lawyer.
yeah,
Sorry, but
you get public defendants, public defenders who hate you and your ideology or your perceived ideology, and they go out of your way to tell you. Like my public defender, because we were in solitary, not because we were supermax, but because this was the COVID era,
Oh,
early 2021, and so DC's worse than every blue state, and so we were in lockdown, so we were in solitary for 23 hours a day, and
wow.
so like if we wanted to do a legal call, which are absolutely monitored, but they're not supposed to be, but they give you like this blue phone that they would like some woman would bring in and hand it to you at your cell, like okay. And so my public defender is on there. He's like, oh yeah, who are you again? Yeah, J6. Are you a member of the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, Oath
Oh
Keepers, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Proud
my
Boys,
god.
Oath Keepers? And I'm like, first off, you got me confused with your other defense. He thought I was Dominic Pizzola, the guy with the riot shield who broke the window in, the Proud Boy guy.
Yes.
I was in jail with him. We both had him, and he couldn't distinguish between the two of us. I'm like, dude, I'm
That's
not a Proud
so
Boy.
crazy.
I've told you a million times I'm not a fucking proud about excuse me, I'm not a Proud Boy. But he just, and all he would do is talk about how much he hated President Trump. He's like, yeah, I want to help you, but unfortunately for you, President Trump's the biggest piece of shit. It's just like, dude, like he would call my family. I would try to have my family talk to him
Oh,
because I only had so many times to talk on the phone. And he would do
yeah.
the same thing. He would just tell my family that he hated President Trump. I was just like, that's great for you. It doesn't help me, not for
Yeah.
nothing, but the legal profession isn't known for being far right. It's not
No, no,
known
no,
for even
no.
being center right. And so I'm okay with presuming the majority of people in the legal field and lawyers are probably left of center, but
Yes. Yeah, they tend to be.
it doesn't have to control their performance. Kind of like
Right.
doctors. Doctors are like it's a high octane field where like there's that neurotic need to win and be awesome and like be the best. And so like you would think that lawyers this is J6. Like, oh hell yeah, I want this case. I want to, make a name for myself. But no, like these guys just threw in the towel. They didn't even try.
They
And so
walk people into prison sentences. That's literally their job, or to try to pressure people into taking plea deals by making them think that, they can't win. The deck is stacked against them. They say the government has a 98% conviction rate. Like especially cases of entrapment, that's a high legal burden to meet that the defense has to prove, and so they try to scare people like you're looking at life in prison. It might be beneficial for you to take a deal. Yeah, lie and say you did something you didn't do.
and they're
I think
friends.
that's
They're
shameful.
they're friends with the prosecutors. My public
Oh
defender was like,
yeah.
yeah, I know your prosecutor. He's a really nice guy, but he's not going to do you any favors. And it was just like they wanted information. If you get what I'm saying, I'm like, I ain't got nothing
Yes.
for you. So like they really, unless like, yeah, they want to rope you into either being a rat or,
Yep.
yeah, copping out to something. Yeah, it's fear. And what's, the funny thing is too, like with J6, obviously this wasn't the case for any of the guys in Michigan, I don't think. I mean, I know that some guys chose to, yeah, some guys were not on the up and up, but I don't think, like, in general all of them had the opportunity where, like, here, take a plea deal, you'll get a misdemeanor, slap you on the, you'll get a hard PP slap and pay a fine. For a lot of J6 like defendants, I think most of us probably would have pled guilty in the beginning of all this if it was proportional, because like there's a history
Right.
of rioters or protesters in DC getting tickets. Like
Yeah.
if it was proportional, that's how it should have been handled for J6. And I think most people would have been like, all right, whatever, maybe I got out of hand, maybe I didn't, I don't know. Even if I didn't, I don't care, I want to go back to my family. In New Jersey, like, I just know from growing up here, people get fined all the time for nonsense. People get tickets for stuff they didn't do. They get pulled over for stuff that's not real. And it's just like, it's just a reality of living in like a very corrupt state where it's just like, okay, you go to your local township, you bring your ticket or whatever, you talk to the prosecutor's office for like, because the prosecutor is in there with the judge will be like, how do you plea? Oh, okay, go talk to the prosecutor, they reduce your charge to something, and then you pay a fine at the window, and that's it. Like, it's like, it was a huge wake up call to me to go to DC and deal with the federal system where it's just like, oh yeah, you walked in a building peacefully. Okay, 20 years. Like, whoa, that's what I'm looking at. 20 years for walking through a building. It's like, how do I pay at the window? I don't understand. This is not how.
Right.
And it's just like, it's just crazy. Yeah, and unfortunately, whether it's the guys in Michigan or J6 or all this, when they're plotting, when they're framing things, again, at the local level in New Jersey, like, there's framing of a narrative is not something they worry about. They just want money. They just want money.
Right.
But when you're dealing with CNN headlines, it's like, oh, there's no chance at all. They, there's no way I'm looking at a hard PP slap and a bye bye. It's got to be years of my life, unfortunately. I'm grateful that I sucks to say, but like, I got off lucky compared to a lot of guys I was locked up with. I only did 3 years on a 4-year sentence. Trump signed the First Step Act, so I was able to get the First Step Act credits, so that reduced some of the time I had to do. But I don't even know, like, did the Michigan guys even qualify for? Hold on, there's people outside. There's people yelling outside my window for no reason. It's like,
I don't think they did. I don't know if they
can
do.
you hear? Can you hear that?
I heard it for a second.
That was
I heard
weird.
some
All right.
lady's voice.
Yeah, that's gotta love that. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I,
so I don't think that they do qualify for that. As far as I know, like Adam and Barry are in Supermax looking at Adam 16 years, Barry 19 and a half. And then the state guys, they are the earliest they can get out would have been, I think, after 12 years, but they can be in there until 2063. And I think they stacked their sentencing. So they had the state guys had charges of providing material support for a terrorist act that didn't occur, and gang affiliation charges and felony firearms. So all of these are bogus bullshit charges. Like The Wolverine Watchman was not a
Hey,
gang.
I thought you didn't want to use bad words. Come on, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm offended.
Sorry, Jesus. Yeah, but they are, though. I mean, this is just made up nonsense. What does it mean to provide material support? And can you explain what material support is? Because it's not like they were providing funds to do something criminal, or like they were getting like proceeds from criminal behavior, which is what a gang is. It is a group involved in criminal activity where there's some benefit to themselves, like they're making money doing it. They have a financial benefit. The Wolverine Watchmen were not taking money. They weren't taking in money, and they weren't out there committing crimes. They're not by any means a gang. But in Michigan, they said 5 or more people with similar like-minded goals and ideals are a gang. So if you have a swimming club, a chess club, you can now be charged as a gang and gang affiliation. And then felony firearms is they were just carrying their legally owned guns while they, quote, provided material support. For the nulls, they said they provided personnel, meaning themselves. They were just there. And then for Paul, oh, well, he taught somebody how to tie a tourniquet. You know, he did the medical training at an FTX. Like they said it was combat medical training. Oh, for if there was combat, he was teaching people how to tie their wounds. Like, what is combat medical training? They even made this show of calling gauze combat gauze at trial, and I was just sitting there like, you think that it's like you're in another world when you're subjected to this, but the average person doesn't listen into the trials, doesn't attend them, and doesn't hear what's being said. Like at
Right.
Barry's sentencing, they were saying that Barry talking about the founding fathers, which they called a myth. And then they said Barry talking about wanting to restore the constitutional republic is no different than ISIS saying they want to restore the caliphate. They're saying Barry had "We the People" tattooed on his arm. This is a terrorist symbol, as they're standing under a thing that says "We the People." And you're like, is this a joke? Is this a joke? It
Holy
seems like it
Orwellian.
is. And they were quoting from interviews I'd done with Barry prior to his sentencing when he was at Newaygo County. Nils Kessler, the prosecutor, the day of his sentencing, is quoting from an interview he did with me to call Barry unrepentant and completely radicalized because he wasn't taking responsibility for the FBI's plot. I just think it's insane. But this
Yeah.
happened, and if you don't experience these things, you can't imagine. I think the average person would find it hard to believe that all of this stuff happened, but it did.
It's like it's like you're in the Twilight Zone. You look around when things are said, and you're like, "Am I the only one hearing it? Like, am I living in another reality?" Like I was on the stands for my trial and playing video from my phone, and instead of pointing like, "Hey, he's not doing anything bad," my prosecutor points like, "Mr. Hale, do you see the man in front of you?" I'm like, yeah." It's just like, "Can you tell us what he's wearing?" It's like, he's got a backpack on. He's like, "Is he wearing military gear?" I'm like, "No, he's wearing a backpack." He's like, "That back that is that
Is
back
that a
that backpack,
combat bag?
it's camouflage." I'm like, "But
Okay.
it's a backpack." It's the camouflage backpack. Okay, you can get that at a store. She's like, "It's camouflage." I'm like looking at the jury,
Okay.
like, am I an idiot? Like, like it's literally a camo. It's just a camo pattern backpack, and she was saying that made it military gear. And maybe I can look back at it because in the military you get what's called a
Ridiculous.
rucksack. A rucksack is
Yeah.
basically a military backpack or whatever. But even in the military, it's just a backpack. It carries stuff like that you can put your
Yeah.
helmet in it, you could put some snacks in it, whatever. It's a
Right.
backpack. Backpack's a backpack, and she's trying to make it seem like this is like
Like it's
some armed assault.
nefarious.
Yeah, the
Right.
guy he
Yeah.
doesn't have a gun. He doesn't have like he's not even wearing like what the hell? What is this? But he's got a camouflage backpack, and so in fact Christopher Cuny, I was with him. I'm familiar with his story, but CUNY was in the Capitol Visitor Center with me as well, because of course the FBI informant with him, James Knowles, was there. And so before we both left, I talked to him for a second, and you can see us on the CCTV, and it's like, and then we leave. She was trying to suggest that that was like coordination, us choosing to leave. And of course, he has a helmet and he's got some gear on, and she's like, that's a big deal too. It's just like
Oh
you're
yeah, yep.
you're trying to make it nefarious, or to look like it's coordination. The fact that we're choosing to leave when the cops told us to leave, it made no sense. But yeah, like all of this stuff, that's how it always is. Like obviously, like with the it's just so it's so bizarre. They every way they can possibly control, like everything. Like I don't know. There's a million things running through my mind because of what you had said recently. And it's just like there are so many different examples of that. The average
Oh
person has
yeah.
just no idea. Like they're just every turn like I was going up a scaffold, and on the way towards the Capitol building, there's like the staircase, and there's thousands of people, and people are going around me. I stop and I pick up a little American flag off the floor, and they tried to suggest that when I bent down, I was trying to manipulate a door behind me, that I was tampering with a door.
What?
Um, like there's no evidence that I'm tampering with the door or I'm even touching it. I clearly bend down, and then when I step up and I go up the staircase, in the next video I have a flag in my hands. Well, it's like, where did I get that little flag? I testified I was picking it up off the ground, but the FBI guy who was providing it was like, this was so weird because like they're just put up like they put an FBI guy on the witness stand just so he can narrate CCTV because there's no audio, and it's just weird. Like, does he just starts coming up with stuff? It's like, it appears to me like he's trying to tamper with that door. For what purpose? They don't go into why I would,
They
because
just talk,
I
just
just
make stuff up.
right. And especially when it comes to the gang thing, I was thinking about that, and I was just like, this reminds me of the obstruction charge, because it said in the obstruction charge, um, whoever corruptly attempts to stop a session of Congress. It's like, well, corruptly in law, corruptly. Think about the word corruption. That typically means that there's some sort of financial gain. Like a
Right.
politician is corrupt, or there's a corrupt cop, or there's some corrupt businessman. It usually involves some sort of personal financial gain. That's what corruption or corruptly means. But no, they were just trying to say evilly. There was some evilly intent, some bad intent in stopping Congress. It's like, well, first off, that's not how laws are supposed to work. That's arbitrary. That's not even, what I'm saying? Like, how does the law determine what's evilly, what I'm saying? Like, so it's like, instead of showing that there was some actual malicious intent to do X, Y, or Z, they just said, well, that they corruptly stopped them. So like, you got hundreds of people who were impacted by the statute, and my lawyer ended up winning, and this, like, his briefs ended up being the basis for the Supreme Court tossing that out. But you still had judges go along with this stupid interpretation of corruptly meaning just being a bad boy, instead of having an actual personal uh, financial benefit or personal gain. And then when you look at the civil disorder charge, I told you that the obstruction charge that actually originates with the Enron scandal. So I mean, like, this is some anachronistic thing that's never been applied to riots or protests. But the same is true for civil disorder. Yes, civil disorder, you might think that applies to riots. Sure, that's true. That's true. But there's a reason why, and it's because the civil disorder charge, it originates with the Civil Obedience Act, I think, of 1968, and it was basically from the race riot era. It was to stop Martin Luther King. It was supposed to stop people protesting for civil rights in D.C. But even more than that, though, even the language of it's extremely vague. It says, someone's guilty of civil disorder if they're a member of what is it? If they're a member of an assembly of 3 or more people engaged in violence. Well, it's just like, do I have to be engaged in violence as long as I'm with that
Right.
assembly? What does that actually mean? And there's actually different case law on it, and there's disagreements. But I mean, it's just that sort of thing. It's just like an assembly of 3 or more people. So they wanted to give me that. I ended up not going to trial for that. But it's just like, like they literally, it's kind of like conspiracies. There's no real, there doesn't have to be any there. They could just throw something at you because you were present. And in the case of the Whitmer guys, obviously that was the case too for them. But it's just like,
Yeah.
people don't understand, whether it's J6 or the Whitmer plot or any of that. Just being present can be dangerous in America, and it
Yeah,
shouldn't be like that.
literally. Your
It
mere
should.
presence there, you can be charged because you were there. You were going to provide, material support just because you were there.
Yeah.
You were providing personnel in the form of yourself. Like these novel, bizarre legal nonsense that they come up with, it is, I think, terrifying. And one other thing that they've done since, the Whitmer case occurred is they introduced an act called the Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act of 2024, literally trying to outlaw militias. So you can, and they cite, the Whitmer case, and they cite January 6th and others to say that, these militia groups are dangerous, and they're gangs, and we've got to get rid of them. And they literally want it to be that you can't just go out and shoot in your backyard with your friends at a target, because now you could be a gang and you could be charged. And I just think that's crazy. We've had militia since the founding of the country, and it's always been a thing. But they really, I think they don't want, and one of the things I think they didn't like about the Whitmer guys is that they were kind of speaking up against, not only what Gretchen Whitmer was doing in her lockdowns, but they were also, when these riots were happening, they were trying to be like their community defense. So they were going to stand between rioters and people, businesses being looted. They would be the people that would go out and guard those businesses. That is why they were targeted. Also, because of their vocal opposition to the mandates. So they
Yeah.
can just literally, okay, we see these people, we don't like them, let's manufacture the crime. And that's what they do. If they have to interpret a law a certain way and come up with a novel legal theory, they will do that. If to try to set these crazy precedents. And so that's why I think it's so important that these cases be reconsidered, and the convictions be vacated or whatever, because we don't need this to be a precedent that then applies to other people to take away their rights. So they're going to use the Whitmer case to now try to say we can't have militias at all. Now, I don't think, to be fair, that bill was passed, but they tried to get it passed. And that's what they use these events for, is to
Sure.
drum up, more nonsense to take away people's rights. That's really what it is about.
Yeah.
And I
Well, they
think that
can't.
January 6th was a big part of that.
They can't move the Overton window through dialogue or through common sense, so they always have to use sensationalism and basically false flags in order to do that. So yeah, it would be completely unpalatable. Like, hey, let's gut the Second Amendment. Can we just do that because feelings? Um,
Right.
yeah, and so
No, we
like,
have to have a boogeyman, like, oh, look at these scary Wolverine watchmen. That's why we have to do it.
yeah, I tend to warn people off of militias, and I always say it's not that you don't have the right to join a militia. It's just, unfortunately, the reality now is that the government has succeeded in pretty much infiltrating any organic movement there is. And so
Yep.
if I wasn't fully like, thank God I didn't join any organizations before J6. They tried to come at me all different kinds of ways. He's a QAnon, or he's a this, he's that. It's just like, what? I never join groups. I'm too much of an introvert, too much of an introverted grump. But I think that helped me to an extent, though not that much. But yeah, I mean, you see the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, they got infiltrated. And I think, to an extent, even though I have questions about a lot of the upper brass in these organizations, I do. I'm not going to hide that. I've always been pretty like skeptical,
Mhm.
because as we saw with the Oath Keepers, like the number two guy was a FBI, dude, and it's just like,
Right.
okay, but the Oath Keepers I met in jail, they did crowd control. Like, they were at the Capitol, like they were only in DC in the first place because they were doing security. They were there for VIPs
Right.
for a few days. In fact, Simone Gold and like they were doing security for her on J6. So that's actually the only reason I think they went to the Capitol, is because they were following VIPs and trying to keep them safe. But they look scary because they're in body armor. But like
Yeah. They did that
Florida,
to the Whitmer guys too. Some of
yeah,
the Whitmer guys, like the Null brothers, provided security to some of Whitmer's opponents, right?
yeah,
Like literally, I think a guy who ran against her. So, they had that background. And I also think that was part of why they were targeted, is
yeah.
that, oh, here they
Well, they see
are with
they
these
got an
people we don't
opportunity.
like.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they see it as
exactly.
an opportunity to get in there, and it's just like, like Jess Watkins, she did like security and stuff like that as part of the Oath Keepers and her little militia thing in Ohio. You got Ken Harrelson, the guys in Florida, those Oath Keepers there, they were there for natural disaster response and stuff like that. These are people who are actually like just trying to help their community. And then you look at the Proud Boys, they're a little not they're a little more they're I'm not going to say they're degens, but they're not quite the same as the Oath Keepers, but they did do a
No.
similar public service, which is that they beat the crap out of Antifa, and so
Right,
they're doing a
right.
public service there. So it's just like, yeah, I mean, I always make the point that the feds have infiltrated every organic movement like ever. They infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan and the civil rights movement. And it's like you can't get more diametrically opposed than those two things, but yet here we are. And so I think that I think regardless of where you fall in the spectrum politically, regardless of whether it's like again like preppers, it's like, hey, let's
Yeah,
infiltrate preppers. It's like, okay, let's infiltrate militias, let's infiltrate the anti-war movement, let's infiltrate parent-teacher groups, let's infiltrate Catholic churches, let's infiltrate pretty much,
exactly.
So it's just like that's why I warn people against joining groups, especially now. I look at and I'm sure you've seen the Patriot Front, just like the Patriot Ruggers, just like they're literally wearing FBI uniforms. They just took FBI off the shirt, like it's the same color. It's literally the
It
same
is, that
uniform,
is kind of funny, and the khaki pants.
right? It's just like they run out of a budget. Like, come on. Anyway, it's just I don't buy. I just don't buy anything I see now. Anytime I see like there's some, especially like with DHS and stuff like that, like I think like you have like this ridiculous radical degenerate like movement, like, hey, let's have drag queens apply makeup to babies or something like that at the local wherever, and like people will be like, oh, that's mess, and then like this reactionary group comes out, it's like, yeah, let's gonna pro, and then it escalates and it causes social tension. It's just like it's literally just a dialectic.
Strategy of tension.
Right. Yeah. It's a Hegelian dialectic. You have problem, reaction, solution, and it's just that's the way I think that they operate now. And so and I
Yeah,
think
I think
leftists, I think
that's true.
leftists, I think the leftists are victims of this too, whether they realize it or not. And I think that yeah. So, but
I
yeah,
agree.
it's unfortunate because I do think people have the right to peaceably assemble. I think people have the right to organize, that they have the right to do the militia thing if they want. It's not my thing, but
Right, and to
people have the right to it.
associate.
The problem is that unfortunately, you've got to be extremely skeptical of all of it, and you shouldn't have to because this is America. But here I am. I'm a comedian, but I can't say half the stuff I want to say, even on Twitter, because God forbid, like, how's that going to be used? Like, what are they going to build against me next time? Um, like, and I still have an appeal open on top of it. So it's just like I got to be careful of everything I say. I can't even be funny, and it's miserable. It's just like they're watching me. I know they're watching me. They're not going to
Oh,
stop.
definitely.
They're never going to stop.
Yeah. They're
So
still watching, the Whitmer guys, the men who've been acquitted. That's my opinion. And I think that they kind of are hoping that they can get them on something else so they can have their chance to get them again because they don't like to lose, to be honest. And I
yeah,
think that that case in particular embarrassed them. So it's sad that this is where we are as a country. And I think that people really need to think about if this is the kind of country they want to live in, where you have to be you know paranoid, or you can't associate with people, or you got to be like you're living in the Soviet Union.
right. Well, again, I don't think they stop. When I got to prison, I like in the back of my head, I'm like, the first person who comes up to talk to me, I know he's going to be a snitch. I just like, sure enough, I know I'm very pale, but I'm Puerto Rican, and so like I mostly rolled with the Hispanics in prison. But the first guy who came up to me, he's part of this white supremacist thing or whatever. He's got all these stupid
Of
Odinist tattoos
course.
and stuff like that. And he's like, "Hey, brother," he's like, he's a midget too. He's like 5 feet tall, like literally. And I'm like, "What's up?" And he's like, "Hey, you want to join our car, bro? You want to roll with our car?" And I'm just like, get away from me. And I just, sure enough, I was able to I found his paperwork and I made sure everybody else saw it. he screwed like 7 other people over for a lighter sentence on some
Oh,
drug conspiracy.
wow,
So it
that's
never stops.
crazy.
It never
That's
stops.
sad.
Yeah, so it's just like, and yeah, I've gotten out. I barely go outside, but it's I don't do anything, so there aren't many opportunities for me to like get set up now. But I've had people like say stuff to me on Twitter. I'm just like, that sounds fetish. I think you're Fed posting that
Right.
glows in the dark. I'm gonna block you, and they freak the fuck out, like, oh, like, and then they turn their account to protected, so I can't see what they're saying. So it's just like, yeah, yeah, I think I made the
That's
right
a little
choice.
sus.
A little bit. It's a little sus.
Wow.
Or I've been to a couple events too. Some political events. I've been to Trump's golf course at Bedminster. I've done a few J6 events so we could raise money for families and stuff. And so like, but sometimes anybody can buy tickets, and so there's like people will show up. And it's just like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. And I'm like, I'm like I said, I'm an introvert. I'm like an indoor cat, very like like I don't fine. Despite liking to make people laugh at the same time, like I don't like strangers, So like people come up to me and then they'll say stuff, and I'll look at them like, I think you're a Fed. I think you're a Fed. As soon as I get a distraction, I walk to the other side of the room. I'm very careful now. Like I'm extremely careful, and it's unfortunate, but like I'll never be able to be an a-hole like I used to be. It's just not
Yeah, you're
there.
not your life won't be the same after this. There's who you were before, and then after something different. And it's the same for the Whitmer guys, I would suggest. I do want to wrap it up here. I know we were going to try to keep it to an hour, go way
Oh
over
gosh,
that. So I
was it?
apologize. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Oh
okay.
my.
So, if there's anything else you want to add, I know we could talk about this for hours. I hope you come back though, because I do want to at some point talk to you about like your what actually like sequence of events of what happened, you
What
know?
actually happened on J6? J6 defendant?
E-
Oh crap, my bad. Yeah,
Exactly.
I probably should have hit
We
that.
didn't get
But
to that,
yeah, there's a little too much Fed stuff, but yeah,
but
I
that's
would be happy to come
important
back.
though. And
Yeah.
I did want to at this one interview, I kind of wanted to compare notes with the Whitmer case and J6 because I think there's so many overlaps, there's so many similarities, and I really wanted to highlight that. I think you're probably the best person to do that because of the stuff that you put out on Twitter. I always see you talking about like what the feds were doing in there, and I'm like, yeah, he knows what's up. So I
One
think that
rat to a rat,
hopefully,
red rat, blue rat. Yeah, plenty of rats.
yeah, hopefully this is a good overview for people who maybe weren't familiar with Tim's case, or maybe you're more familiar with the Whitmer case. You don't know much about J6. Hopefully this was a good overview for people on both of the cases and the similarities between the two, the connections, of course, between the Whitmer case and who at the FBI was overseeing that, overseeing January 6th as well. So I think it was very informative, and I hope you come back, and thank you for coming on. And if you
I learned.
want, put your plugs out there. And you're not just on Twitter, right? Or are you on other
Um,
platforms?
I mean, I'm on Twitter, Getter, and Truth. To be perfectly frank, I just copy and paste what I write on X onto those other things, and I usually forget to do even that. But I have a YouTube channel. I post all my interviews on YouTube. You can find me at Tim Hale J6. But other than that, most of my stuff's on Twitter. I don't like it's like so much work to do stuff. So yeah, you can find me at Tim Hale, criminally funny J6er, or you could just type this right here, the Louis of Monmouth. I thank you for having me, and I did not realize how much time had passed. I just so love exposing feds. So thank you for having me on. I would love to come back. You're a lamb.
Definitely. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Power to the